My name is Emily, and I'm 25 years old, living in Texas. Not too long, I went through a painful breakup. The emotional toll was so overwhelming that I isolated myself completely. I locked myself in my room, avoiding social interactions as much as possible. I'd only step out to grab lunch or dinner and would spend the rest of the day alone in my room. I thought solitude was comforting, but looking back, maybe it was one of the reasons my relationship fell apart. During this time, I lost interest in eating or taking care of myself. My health started to decline rapidly. I lost a lot of weight and my body felt weak. Anxiety became a constant battle. My parents noticed the changes and took me to several doctors, but every test and report came back normal. The doctors didn't understand what was wrong with me. They prescribed some vitamins and sent me home, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Sometimes the weakness became so severe that I'd pass out without warning. Months passed like this, 4 to be exact. Eventually, I forced myself to return to my routine and resumed school. Surprisingly, I noticed that being at school made me feel better. The depressive weight lifted slightly and I started eating more regularly. However, there was still a strange persistent pain in my body that no doctor could explain. This all happened during September. One day, after returning home from school, I felt an icy sensation beneath my feet. It started spreading through my entire body, a chilling cold that didn't feel natural. When I got home, I sat down, but my vision began to blur, and the world around me seemed hazy. Before I knew it, I collapsed. Luckily, my mom found me and rushed me to the hospital. Once again, the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. The tests were normal, and they attributed my condition to low blood pressure. They treated me for it temporarily, and I was sent home. My parents, desperate for answers, took me to different doctors and specialists, but no one could figure out what was happening. Finally, out of options, they decided to take me to the local church to see a priest. At the church, the priest performed some rituals and spoke to my mom. He told her, "This is a demonic presence. An ancient spirit has attached itself to her, possibly because of the isolation she put herself through." Hearing this terrified me. I had only ever heard of things like this in movies or horror stories. The priest handed me a pendant with inscriptions on it. He said, "Wear this at all times. It will protect you from any negative forces. Never take it off." I followed his instructions and wore the pendant around my neck. Almost immediately, I felt a sense of relief. My life slowly returned to normal. I was eating better, gaining back my strength, and excelling in my studies. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, but this peace didn't last. A few weeks later, my friends and I went to the beach for a day of fun. While swimming and enjoying the waves, I didn't realize when the pendant slipped off my neck. Suddenly, I felt an icy chill, just like before. At first, I thought it was from cold water and wind, but then I remembered the pendant. Panicking, I searched for it frantically with my friends. Thankfully, one of them found it, and I immediately put it back on. I hoped everything would go back to normal, but it was too late. Something had changed. That night, even with the pendant on, I began having terrifying nightmares. Sleep paralysis gripped me, and I often felt like someone was watching me, lurking in the shadows. I woke up exhausted, as if something was draining the energy from me while I slept. I started suspecting that the pendant was causing this. To test my theory, I took it off one night and set it aside. At first, I felt lighter and more positive, as if a weight had been lifted, but soon my behavior began to change. I became aggressive, snapping at my parents over trivial matters. My mood swings were extreme, and my parents noticed something was off. When they saw I wasn't wearing the pendant anymore, they decided to take me back to the priest. The priest listened carefully as I explained what had been happening. He told me, "The relief you felt without the pendant was the demon deceiving you. It wants you to abandon the protection, leaving you vulnerable." The priest performed more rituals and gave me a new, stronger pendant. However, after wearing it, things escalated. Strange scratches and small cuts began appearing on my body, and I had no memory of how they got there. I started questioning my own sanity. Was this all in my head? Or was something sinister truly happening? One night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a faint voice calling my name. It was sweet and eerie, like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, I ignored it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the voice grew louder, persistent, almost commanding. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen. I felt as if I were in a trance, unable to resist its pull. I got up and followed the voice, completely unaware of what I was doing. When I reached the kitchen, the voice whispered, "Pick up the knife and cut your hand." My mind was foggy and I couldn't think properly. I picked up the knife and placed it against my palm, ready to press down, but at the last moment, something jolted me back to reality. I dropped the knife and ran back to my room, shaking and terrified. The next morning, I found the knife exactly where I had left it. That's when I realized this wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. Worse, my behavior toward my parents continued to deteriorate. I lashed out at them, refusing to sleep in their room despite my growing fear of being alone. The night I lay in my bed, trembling, unable to sleep, I knew whatever was haunting me wasn't done yet. And deep down, I feared the worst was yet to come. The night I decided to sleep alone in my room again, the tension in the air was thick, as though something ominous awaited me. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dim glow of my night lamp, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. Yet, the silence of the room was deafening, almost as if the shadows themselves were alive, breathing in sync with me. Suddenly, I heard faint whispers. It was my name again, but this time it was louder, clearer, and closer. My pulse quickened, my body froze as if invisible hands were pinning me to the bed. The voice was no longer coming from the kitchen. It was now in my room, right next to me. "Come to me," it whispered, sending a chill shiver down my spine. I shut my eyes tightly, clutching the new locket around my neck. But the whispers grew louder, insistent. I could feel the icy presence hovering over me, as if it was trying to seep into my very soul. When I finally gathered the courage to open my eyes, I saw the faint outline of a shadow at the foot of my bed. It wasn't human. Its form twisted and shifted, its hollow eyes boring into mine. It extended a claw-like hand toward me, and for a moment I felt a strange pull, as though it was trying to take something from me, perhaps my spirit, or maybe even my life. Terrified, I screamed and yanked at the locket around my neck. It glowed faintly, and the shadow recoiled, shrieking in a cold, curdling wail before disappearing into the darkness. I sat there, trembling and gasping for air, clutching the locket as tears streamed down my face. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They rushed me back to the father at the church. After hearing my story, he looked deeply troubled. "This spirit is not done with you," he said gravely. "It is ancient, persistent, and malevolent. It feeds on your fears and weaknesses. You must remain strong, never take this locket off again, and we will need to perform a series of blessings to cleanse your soul and your home." Even with the locket on, I can't shake the feeling that I am being watched, that it's still waiting, lurking in the shadows, bidding its time. The father's words echo in my mind every night. "It is not done with you." Now every time I close my eyes, I wonder if this battle will ever truly end, or will the darkness eventually claim me, no matter how tightly I cling to the light. It was a freezing cold night, somewhere around December 27th or 28th. I remember it vividly because the chill in the air was biting. My mom had gone to visit my grandmother, and my dad was out of town on business. I was home alone. As usual, I decided to pass the evening by watching a movie on my laptop. It was around 10 p.m., and I had just started a horror movie I'd heard a lot about. I put on my headphones, fully immersing myself in the experience, hoping to recreate that theater like atmosphere. I had barely watched 10 or 15 minutes when I suddenly felt something strange. It was faint at first, but I thought I heard a knock at the door. I'd paused the movie, removed my headphones, and listened carefully. The house was silent. Confused, I got up and walked to the door. When I peeked through the peephole and then the gallery window, there was no one there. The silence outside was unsettling, with only the faint sound of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder breaking the quiet. It was cold, yet oddly peaceful. I chalked it up to my imagination, locked the door, and went back to my movie. But not even 7 minutes later, I heard it again, this time louder. The knock wasn't at the door, it was coming from the window. I froze. The knock was unmistakable and deliberate, and it came from the window right beside me. Slowly, I turned my head towards it, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Gathering courage, I walked over the window and peered outside. No one was there. Just the rain, the shadows of the trees swaying in the wind, and the eerie silence. I tried to convince myself it was probably just the wind or maybe a branch tapping against the window. But before I could even sit back down, I heard it again, this time from the door. My fear turned into panic. The knocks kept alternating between the window and the door, and I was standing in the middle of the room, unsure where to go. There was no way someone could have moved that quickly between the two spots. My house was secure, with locked doors and windows protected by grills, so how could anyone possibly be out there? At that point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to call my mom. My hands were trembling as I dialed her number. I tried to explain what was happening, but my voice cracked under the weight of my fear. She told me she'd come as soon as possible and told me to stay calm. But calm was the last thing I felt. As I sat on the couch, waiting for her to arrive, the knocks stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. A shadow. It moved just barely near the bathroom door. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I was certain something or someone had just walked past. The shadow wasn't normal, it felt off. Too long, too distorted. I was drenched in sweat despite the cold. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. I wanted to run outside to find someone, anyone, but my fear had paralyzed me. Then I heard it, a scream. It was a piercing, blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from the backyard. It sounded like a woman crying out in pure agony. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I rushed upstairs to get a better view of the backyard from the window, and that's when I saw her. She was standing under the largest tree in the yard. Her figure was illuminated by the faint glow of the backyard light. She wore a long, white dress, almost like a wedding gown. Drenched from the rain, her hair was impossibly long, reaching past her knees, and her arms were unnaturally extended, the hands hanging well past her knees. She wasn't moving. She just stood there facing the tree. My breath hitched. I knew, deep down, I was looking at something that wasn't human. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. All I could do was stand there, trembling as the figure slowly turned towards the house. That's when I saw her face. It wasn't a face at all. Her skin was pale and cracked. Her eyes sunken into dark voids, and her mouth was twisted into an unnatural grin. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. As I stumbled downstairs, I made the decision to leave the house, to run to the security guard outside, but just as I reached the staircase, I froze. She was there, standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me with the horrifying grin. My legs gave out from under me. I trembled down the stairs. When I hit the ground, I found myself lying at her feet. Her feet! They were burned, charred, as if she'd walked through fire. And then everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning, and I was in my bed with my mom sitting beside me. My dad and a neighbor were also there, looking concerned. I tried to tell them what happened, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They thought it was just a nightmare, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it.